Did you ever have that experience as a kid where you were watching a show that was pretty much harmless, but for one reason or another your parent was absolutely convinced that it was teaching you bad things? For me, that show was Ed, Edd and Eddy. I recently asked my mother what her reasoning was for banning this cartoon in my household back when I was younger, and she claimed that it was because she heard one of the characters use swear words during an episode. Now don't get me wrong, if she had told me it was from something like the sextant scene in Big Picture Show, then I'd completely understand, but that movie came out in 2009 and I was watching this show in 2001. I have no idea what episode she could have possibly seen that would have given her the idea that these kids in a TV Y7 animated cartoon series were swearing up a storm, but it's funny though, despite her banning the show when I was younger, I still ended up watching it anyways, mostly whenever I'd go over to my grandparents' house where I could watch it alone in their upstairs bedroom while the rest of my family was staying downstairs. And I can guarantee this won't be the last time you hear about my grandparents' house either, because I spent days upon days upon days of my life watching classic Cartoon Network there back when I was a kid. It's also where I watched my first episode of the Powerpuff Girls, Kids Next Door, Billy and Mandy, Foster's Home, Samurai Jack, and, if memory serves, Ed, Edd and Eddy. Tying that story into today's video, I've been in the mood for Ed, Edd and Eddy again as of late, and what better way to get back into one of my favorite cartoons as a child than by taking a look at all of the handheld video games that were released during its run. Despite being the longest running series in Cartoon Network's entire library of original works, not counting continuations or reboots, it actually only saw the release of 3 video games during its lifespan. Jawbreakers for the Game Boy Advance, the Misadventures for the Game Boy Advance, and Scam of the Century for the Nintendo DS. As the title of the video suggests, I'm only looking at the handheld version of Misadventures for this video. The console and PC version will be getting its own exclusive video in the not-so-distant future. Alright, so many of you are probably wondering why I've decided to combine 3 Ed, Edd and Eddy games into one video. Well, the truth is, this first game is utter shit, and I don't see how I could talk about it for 15 to 20 minutes by itself. Where do I begin? Ed, Edd and Eddy Jawbreakers is a mind-numbingly, painstakingly, insufferably slow 2D platforming game that makes you want to pull your hair out at every waking moment. And quite frankly, you'd probably go bald by the time you even finish the first world of the game. Now don't get me wrong, the core idea at play here is admittedly brilliant for an Ed, Edd and Eddy game. It's actually based upon a title for the Super Nintendo known as The Lost Vikings, which was a game that featured you taking control of 3 different characters, each with their own set of abilities and weaknesses that led to an engagingly fun puzzle platformer with various challenges to overcome as you guide each of the Vikings to the end of the stage. Jawbreakers takes this concept and applies it to the Eds, in which the game has you switching between all 3 of them and using their unique abilities to traverse through each level and get them all to the end. A simple enough concept that was butchered horribly in execution. Unbearably inaccurate hitboxes, impossible to determine jumps, and extremely limited lives lead to this being one of the most frustrating Game Boy Advance games I think I've ever played. I booted this game up and made it through about 2.5 levels before realizing this wasn't worth my time because of the sheer lack of enjoyment that I was getting out of it. And I pretty much realized this wasn't going to be fun from the get-go because the game practically drops you into the first level with no indication of what to do. And unlike a game such as Mega Man X or Sonic Adventure 2, where the game teaches you the functionality of its mechanics through the level design of the very first stage, this game doesn't tell you jack shit. So instead, for your convenience, I'm gonna tell you everything you need to know about this game. Eddy is the fastest character of the 3 and comes equipped with the ability to double jump, making him the most enjoyable character to play as, and I guarantee that if the other 2 Eds played like him, I would probably be going easier on this game right now. Eddy also gains access to a jetpack ability that allows him to fly later in the game, and the Hypno Disc, which can freeze enemies in place for a few seconds. Yeah, he's undoubtedly the best character of them all, and I wish I could just play the whole thing as him alone. Double D, being the smart one of the group, can utilize a slingshot for a more ranged-based attack, and a wrench once you pick it up in a level in order to fix these hydrants, which is necessary to progress through the stage. It seems Dexter wasn't the only one losing the same item over and over again after leaving every single room. He also comes with the weakness of being incapable of walking over disgusting surfaces like wet cement or dirty mud, so you need to either platform above those sections of the level or relying on jumping in the carts that Ed can push across the gaps for him. Speaking of Ed, he sucks. Not the character, mind you, but his moveset. He's the slowest of the three and can't do much of anything at all. He gets easily distracted by chickens, and his only ability of note is that he can smash breakable walls with a football helmet, making him more of a burden to the team than anything else. He's got the lowest jump, the slowest movement, and the biggest hitbox. His only purpose in the entire game is to push a few things and smash the occasional wall. Otherwise, there's nothing special about him whatsoever. He exists so that you get hurt. He may as well not even have the ability to jump at all, because it's practically useless anyways, and I feel like I can never judge whether or not I'm going to land on a platform while playing as him. Like, that clearly looks like I should be able to make that jump, and in almost any other game I would clear it no problem, but here the character's mobility is so limited that he may as well just stay on the ground the entire time. Oh, but guess what? A lot of this game's level design is focused on verticality, meaning you have to scale up extremely tall levels as this guy with the risk of falling down a significant portion every time you miss a jump. At the very least, you don't suffer fall damage, but the game does punish you by forcing you to sit through this getting up animation every single time you fall more than like a foot off the ground. A fall several stories in the air, yeah, I understand that, but a fence? This is why I chose to just enter the invincibility and infinite jetpack cheat code so I could fly through all the levels as fast as possible. I'm sorry if it bothers some people that I didn't take the time to beat this legitimately, but I have shit to do, and I'm not about to waste hours of my life on a game that was just going to leave me dissatisfied anyways. The nice thing about this cheat code though is it actually gives the jetpack to all three of the characters, not just Eddy, which made flying past all of the levels even more of a breeze. And it gives me the excuse of showing you sprites that you would otherwise not be able to see in the entire game. So that's my justification. Let me assure you that I wouldn't have completed this game at all had I not been given the ability to do this. I can at least compliment the sprite work though. It's easily the best part of the entire experience. The team behind this did a phenomenal job recapturing the style and look of Ed, Edd and Eddy on the Game Boy Advance, between the backgrounds mimicking episodes perfectly to the little details in the characters' animations. The 3-frame outline didn't quite translate perfectly, but you gotta respect them for getting the Ed's running animations to look exactly as they do in the show. I'd also like to add that the soundtrack is doing its best, but honestly, and I can't believe I'm saying this, there weren't enough trumpets. The plot of the game is pretty basic, even more so than some episodes of the actual Ed, Edd and Eddy cartoon. Basically, the Eds hear about a contest in which everlasting Jawbreakers are being raffled off at the candy store, so the Eds take it upon themselves to acquire as many raffle tickets as they can to increase their odds of winning. This leads to their typical scam antics, where they end up getting the other neighborhood kids to hand over their tickets either by finding a lost item for them, such as Naz's black book that's actually read in the game, or Plank for Johnny, or beating them in a duel like Rolf and Kevin. At the end of the game, after Double D gets kidnapped and you rescue him from the Kanker sisters, the Eds make it to the candy store only to find out that Jimmy had the winning ticket all along, and the game just ends with nothing more than a somewhat witty fourth wall break. And don't get me wrong, I love fourth wall breaks. Chowder's one of my all-time favorite cartoons, but this is a very unsatisfying ending to a very unsatisfying game. I get that it's replicating how the cartoon usually goes, but considering that the player is now in the same position that the Eds are instead of watching from afar, separated from the action, it ultimately hinders the fulfilling experience of finishing the game. I mean, why put a player through all of that sluggish frustration just for that ending? At least I was rewarded with something when I beat the Game Boy Advance version of Revenge of the Flying Dutchman. I understand the argument that some may want to make where it makes you feel like the characters do in the show, but when you are actually doing all that work and getting nothing for it, it's still not a very good feeling. But hey, that's just me. Supposedly, according to the Ed, and Eddy wiki, this game had some troubles that led to it being delayed from the fall of 2002 to the spring of 2003, but I can't verify a source for this information as of yet. Even still, if you told me this game was unfinished, I wouldn't doubt you for a second. It definitely comes across as though certain aspects of the game remain unfinished. I mean, as it stands, it's a certainly playable game, but it's way too slow for its own good. And ironically, at the time of this game's release, the Game Boy Advance port of none other than The Lost Vikings ended up coming out a week before it, making for some really bad timing on this game's part. And to make matters worse, every level in this game has a time limit, making the already painstakingly slow gameplay even more stressful by adding an element of artificial anxiety. There's no reason for there to be a time limit in these stages, and yes, if you do time out, you game over, meaning you have to stop where you're at and do the entire level all over again, faster. How fun does that sound? And the time limit may seem pretty high, but when you're forced to sit through extremely sluggish controls and constantly missing jumps that are otherwise super easy to make, yeah, the time can actually crawl up on you, and that doesn't make for a fun time. But this game goes one step further than that, because the live system is also extremely unforgiving. Like, I'm talking one hit and you're dead unforgiving, with no power-ups, no rings, no shields, no health bar, no Aku Aku masks, nothing. In this game, if you get hit once, you lose a life no matter the circumstance. Lose all of your lives and it's an instant game over. Couple that with the fact that at most you can get 1 or 2 extra lives in a stage, and you'll realize why I detest this game so much and took the easy way out. Everything is out to kill you, and if you game over at all, you have to start the entire stage all over again. Checkpoints may as well be worthless. It's for all of these reasons that I sadly cannot recommend Jawbreakers to anybody whatsoever. Not even a fan of Ed, and Eddy. My lord, was this game such a disappointment, but I guess considering this was yet another game published by BAM Entertainment, and their track record hasn't been so great based on my experience, I shouldn't really be surprised. Oh man, no offense to the company or anything, but I've yet to run into a game published by them that I actually consider good. I genuinely hope that the next 2 titles I'm about to look at can step up their game, because this is not a great start. So let's shift gears into the second Ed, and Eddy game released on the Game Boy Advance. The Misadventures, released 2 years later in 2005. Right off the bat, I can say that Misadventures is a massive improvement over Jawbreakers in just about every possible way that you could imagine. Better sprite work, better stories, better gameplay, better music, better level design, and above all else, better control. If you were to ask me what the #1 most critical aspect of making a video game is, I will always answer the control. A game could have the most enticing story ever written, or an immersive world to get lost in, but if the controls do not complement the experience, it will always break my immersion and hinder my enjoyment of everything else. Making the game a chore to play detracts from the entire experience, and if I'm having trouble just trying to move my character on the screen, then it distracts me to the point that my sole focus is trying not to careen off an edge and die in the case of something like Sonic 06. Unlike the previous title, the handheld version of Misadventures was developed by Artificial Mind and Movement, now known as Behavior Interactive, and had developed numerous other handheld games prior to this, such as Ice Age and Monsters Inc. Scream Team. They're also the ones responsible for developing the Teen Titans video game shortly after this one, for what it's worth. It was published by Midway instead of BAM Entertainment this time around, seeing as their last Cartoon Network game was Samurai Jack: The Amulet of Time in 2003. Misadventures takes everything Jawbreakers did and improves on it tenfold. making this a much more pleasant experience in comparison. I tell you what, experiencing this game directly after playing Jawbreakers has made me appreciate it so much more for what it does right. So the basic premise of the game is very similar to the former example in the sense that the Eds are trying to scam the neighborhood kids so that they can earn enough change in order to purchase some good old-fashioned Jawbreakers to enjoy. The game is structured a bit differently than before in the sense that the entire game is now one giant level. No hub worlds, no map, no individual level select. You're thrown right into the neighborhood and you just go from there. The map has checkpoints available in the form of plank and a cape on a spring. The game's story is broken into individual scams that the Eds partake in one at a time, similar to the console version, except in a 2D side-scrolling format. From there, you can go around the levels finding spare change to collect Jawbreakers and assist the neighborhood kids in whatever tasks they may need help with. There's one scam called Cool Your Ed, where the Eds collect ice for Johnny, only to later realize that it all melted by the time they get back to him. There's Ed-a-Doodle-Doo, in which Rolf asks you to find his lost chickens, that proves unsuccessful. And then there's Ed Marks the Spot, where you have to run through a nightmare sequence trying to escape from the Canker Sisters at the end of the game. Talk about nightmare fuel. Seriously. 3 of the 6 scams overlap with the console version of the game, but there are 3 original stories exclusive to the Game Boy Advance version, so there is some incentive to play this game over the console version. Another improvement over the previous title is that instead of controlling each of the Eds individually, you control whichever character is in the lead while the other 2 follow behind you, similar to something like Tails in Sonic the Hedgehog games, except you can swap between them. By pressing the R button, you can rotate the Eds in and out of the lead, making it so you don't have to traverse the same level 3 different times with slightly different movesets, but rather giving you the ability to use each character's unique attributes in order to solve puzzles on the fly. It eliminates all of that tedium of waiting to get the character you need to progress caught up to wherever you were forced to stop in the level. Each of the movesets translated over from the previous game too, with Eddy being the only one to receive major changes. Now, he is capable of lobbing a stink bomb for a mid-ranged attack. Because yes, now you can actually defend yourself from enemies using your default moveset instead of a limited consumable item. The only downside is that because it travels in an arc through the air, it can be a little difficult to be precise, but you get used to it pretty quick. Unfortunately, his movement capabilities have been severely hindered, so no more jetpack or double jump sadly. Still though, the single jump is all you really need because Misadventures greatly increased the vertical height you gain, making platforming so much easier to judge and navigate. Double D still retains his slingshot, although this time around it has infinite ammo and is more ingrained into the puzzle solving. And he also has the ability to interact with technical objects like water valves and umbrellas. What was essentially his wrench ability, but now without the need to find the item in the level first. Ed also maintains his head bash move, except now it's his default attack, so no more football helmet, thank goodness. And of course he can still push things as well. He also isn't incredibly sluggish, and his jump isn't completely useless. In terms of the platforming, the Eds are 10 times more fun to play as thanks to their enhanced usability in the stages combined with the consistent sprite work and hitboxes. I don't find myself having trouble making precise jumps thanks to the increased jump height. Ed especially is no longer a pain to lug around from one place to another thanks to his increased movement speed. A lot of the puzzles are simple yet fun, and the level design caters to all 3 of the Eds. Each character even unlocks a super move as the game progresses, providing for more mobility and problems to solve, whether it be Ed's ultra-fast dash attack or the tower stack led by Eddy. Double D even gains a super jump, which makes getting up to high to reach places a cinch and provides for more sequencing goodies to be discovered by the player. Even the soundtrack, I feel, has done a better job at capturing the score of the series it's based on and grossing me even further into the world of Ed, Edd, and Eddy. Yes, truthfully, the Misadventures for the Game Boy Advance is such an improvement over Jawbreakers in every single way that it has made the former title completely obsolete. Take it from me when I say there is absolutely no reason to revisit and play Jawbreakers when Misadventures exists because it does everything that game did infinitely better. It is far more engaging, it is a great handheld game, and it is a shame that more people don't recognize it for what it is. Sure, I see people mention the console version from time to time, but the handheld rendition of the game has proven to be quite the enjoyable experience in its own right. I tried finding reviews of this game online to see what other people were saying about it, but no major gaming sites, as far as I'm aware, had any critical reviews available. And even still, there were very few user scores present to really give me an idea of how people felt about this one. My entire reason for making these videos was to set out and discover underappreciated games I had never thought to give it a chance. And this is the first one I've found where I can say, I'm impressed. It may be simple in its premise and a bit too short for its own good, but I cannot deny that I had a great time experiencing this game for the first time and would happily play it again in the future. I'm not sure how much praise the Handheld Misadventures game is given in the Ed fandom specifically, but it really feels like people were sleeping on this one, from my perspective. This is an underlooked gem, no doubt about that. If you're a fan of the Eds, then I can wholeheartedly recommend you give this game a chance because I was not disappointed in this title. Not one bit. So where does Game of the Century fall in comparison to the other two games? Right smack dab in the middle. While I don't find this to be an underrated gem like the handheld version of Misadventures, I think it has some amount of effort put into it and was still a more enjoyable experience than Jawbreakers. Scam was surprisingly developed by Japanese video game developer Artco, with this being the only Cartoon Network game developed by the studio. The plot of the game follows the Eds after Eddy's scam book gets stolen by the neighborhood kids, which leads them to getting chased out of the cul-de-sac because their secrets have been exposed. And you know, despite the fact that Captain Melonhead is right there on the title screen, he never actually shows up until the final boss fight of the game, so even though the kids threaten the Eds with the utterance of his name, he never actually does anything until the final boss. Still cool that he's in the game at all though. From there, the game branches off into one of 3 distinct paths, one for each of the Eds. Yes, unlike the previous games, this time around you control each individual Ed on a separate adventure from the other 2 for 4 levels each. And quite frankly, that makes no sense for the characters because seldom do you ever see these guys separate, and there's not really a reason given for it either. Would have been better if it did what the last 2 did, where you just control all 3 in every single stage, but hey, I guess I can understand them wanting to mix it up from previous titles. Eventually, the gang meets back up at the end of the game for one final round where they each have to fight their own bosses of the game, followed by Captain Melonhead giving the final hurrah. At the very least, this has the best ending of the 3 games because the Eds are actually successful this time around, something that can't be said for the other 2. The controls are responsive, but unlike the last game where each character felt distinct, this time around all 3 of them can double jump, use one basic attack, and one special attack. Otherwise, all 3 of them are pretty much uniform characters. I think Eddy has the highest jump and Ed has the weakest, but that could be my mind playing tricks on me due to playing the other 2 games before this. Eddy's primary attack sees him spitting out a wad of gum, which can stick enemies to the ground, allowing you for easy access to jumping on them. Double D throws his dictionaries at opponents, but it's much more limited compared to the slingshot he had previously because it can't really be aimed. And you can probably guess that Ed has his face slam like he's always had, so not much has really changed there. Of the 3 games, I think this has the best user interface going in. Each menu screen fixates on one of the Eds reacting to your selections in a pretty accurate manner to the show. In fact, the presentation of the game as a whole comes across very faithful. The bottom screen artwork is a perfect match to the cartoon, and the 3D models, while a little weird, are quick to get used to. The game actually uses this technique of creating a 3D model for the character's body while using a 2D sprite for their head. Likely because the devs wanted to capitalize on the DS's ability to use 3D without sacrificing the expressiveness of the characters' faces. After all, the DS may have been capable of 3D graphics, but that didn't mean it always looked good. I think the use of the sprites for the facial expressions was a smart decision because it makes the reactions of the characters look so much better and easy to distinguish. I also commend this game for integrating the bottom screen into the gameplay in a non-intrusive manner. It's similar to something like Kirby's Squeak Squad in the sense that you can pick up items to store for later, and you activate them just by tapping the bottom screen at any time during the stage. You can also tap each Ed when their power meter is full to use their special attack. Scam of the Century is yet another platformer for the Eds, except this time around if you die, you not only get put back at the last checkpoint, but it resets your score to 0, meaning if you care about the star ratings for each stage, you're in for a real nightmare because you need to play perfectly. I personally didn't bother going for them, so this wasn't a huge ordeal, but for those who would want to go for the best rating, it's good to be aware. Also, as a side note, if you fall into a pit, that counts as a death, so avoid them at all costs if you're going for a higher ranking because there's no forgiveness there. You gotta restart the entire level all over again if you want 5 stars, so whatever you do, do not fall into a pit because it is an instant run killer. That's easier said than done, of course, because I don't know who thought this was a good idea, but Scam of the Century goes way too overboard with the enemy placements in this game. Someone at the studio gave the wrong person the copy and paste tool because they were irresponsible as hell with the amount of enemies in each level. I mean, holy shit, it's actually pretty ridiculous how many enemies appear on screen at certain points. This game was not easy by any stretch of the imagination. It certainly starts out that way in the beginning, but trust me, there are a lot of bullshit mechanics here that I could see certain players getting very frustrated with very quickly. For instance, Eddy's second level when he's running through the trailer park trying to avoid the Canker sisters. In the first sequence, Marie Canker is jumping erratically all around the screen trying to damage you, and you have to do your damnedest not to get hurt too many times while also trying to avoid the other enemies and platform. It's like if the sun from Mario 3 just decided to become a pinball around the screen instead of diving from one corner to the other. It's nowhere near as predictable, and to make matters worse, she also spits a projectile at you, and even if you do try hiding from her on higher parts of the stage, she'll still find a way to dive bomb you from above because she's just that broken. I mean, look at this footage I'm showing you right now. She's absolutely unstoppable when she has no right to be. And you can't run in a straight line because she's faster than you, so she could either jump and land on you or just follow you from behind until she catches you. You have to run from Kevin in the next stage while dodging Rolf's massive tractor and dealing with all of these enemies, and Kevin moves at almost twice your speed, making it next to impossible to avoid taking damage. The next part of the stage has you avoiding May Canker by turning light switches off to keep her from seeing you. This part isn't so bad, it's actually more of a breather section of the stage, but then the last sequence comes in where Lee Canker just randomly pops up from the bottom of the screen without any tell or way to see her ahead of time. I hope you've got good reaction time because you have less than a second to react to avoid hitting her, it feels like. Not to mention the fact that she seems to always know exactly where you're going to be if you don't change course, so that you're going to run into her every single time. Standing still? No problem for May, because she'll just rise up underneath you and make Eddy feel extremely uncomfortable. Running in a straight line? May knows exactly where you'll be. Trying to land from a jump? May's already there waiting to catch you. And that's the worst case of them all. Trying to land from a jump where you can't see her coming because you're too high off the ground can get frustrating because you have no idea if she's there or not. And when you have to make precise jumps over pits like this, it's a total crapshoot whether you're going to make it or take a hit and possibly fall all the way in. This portion of the stage in particular I find to be extremely asinine because between the placement of some of these ravens, which I swear to God are in such inconvenient places, to the fact that you will find yourself falling into the giant open pit halfway through the stage over and over and over again. This one raven in particular kept killing me numerous times because it is placed at just the right height to where if you do a singular jump, the very top of your head just clips it enough to take a hit, and if you get hit in midair, you lose all of your momentum and drop like a rock right into the pit, causing a game over and resetting you to the last checkpoint. At the very least, this game has infinite lives, so you don't have to start the entire stage all over again, so I can give it that at least. But I've found that a lot of the levels in this game just reek of unreasonable enemy placement. I mean, I get people have issues with Metropolis Zone and Sonic 2, but I'd rather put up with slicers than these stupid-ass ravens. It honestly feels like there are certain enemies that cannot be avoided no matter what you do, and then there are other times where you swear on everything you should have damaged an enemy, yet you yourself took a hit, while there are other times where you somehow get right around something without any issue whatsoever. This happened to me literally within 15 seconds of each other. Eddy's last stage is also a nightmare because you're put into a side-scrolling sequence where Sarah and Jimmy are firing at you while you try to avoid enemies and platform over bottomless pits while landing on extremely small platforms that guess what? Have enemies on them. This is not how you design a game. This is artificial difficulty. You either have to get lucky and hope that this enemy is on the far right of the platform when you go to land on it, or double jump to jump on top of it, but also hope that Sarah's projectile isn't headed straight at you while you land, otherwise you're probably going to get sent right back off due to the knockback, and then you gotta test your luck 3 more times after that, even if you do make the first jump. And even when you eventually make it across, you still gotta avoid all these other enemies and projectiles without dying at all, otherwise you gotta do the entire sequence all over again. I'm certain that if this game just had a little more thought put into the placements of these enemies, it could redeem the experience quite a bit, but most of the levels in this game just have too much going on in them for their own good, creating an ultimately miserable experience that only gets further accentuated once bottomless pits come into the mix. Like I said, somebody was erratically abusing the copy and paste tool to the point where it ruins what would have otherwise been a decently okay Nintendo DS game. Scam of the Century also contains some mini games which I don't find to be too terribly interesting, but hey, if you decide to play this game and want to beat my high score on the meat switching game, then be my guest. Apparently this game in particular is super rare nowadays, which baffles me considering it's not really worth the price that it's going for. I don't know, this was a subpar game at best, and Misadventures on the previous handheld device was a far more enjoyable and superior game. Some may call this game a scam. I don't know if I'd go that far because my standards for licensed games are already set remarkably low, but I can't deny that the bullshit enemy placement will definitely leave a lot of players frustrated with the game in the end. At the very least, it doesn't take me 6 seasons and a movie to finish this game, unlike Jawbreakers over there. So overall, could I recommend any of these games? Well, of course. Misadventures on the Game Boy Advance had a great amount of care put into it, and despite being on the easy side, was definitely more enjoyable than the other two. I'll honestly take an easy game that's fun to play over a painfully slow, boring mess, or a platformer that had minimal thought put into its level design because the enemies are just slapped wherever. Even if I only liked one of the titles, I had a lot of fun checking out this trilogy of games. This was a nifty experiment that I think worked out for the best, and I'm totally open to trying something like this again in the future. As always, feel free to share your experiences with any of these titles down below in the comments, and feel free to recommend me any other franchises that had a group of handheld games that you think would work well in this trilogy style of video. I guess that's all I have for now, so until next time, Shadowstreak signing off.